Hello and welcome to the Agora Politics podcast. This is your host, Alex Murshak. Today I'm speaking with Victor Rivera. Victor is a clinical psychology graduate student at Pepperdine University. We talk maintaining mental health in quarantine, how to engage with people you disagree with, particularly when your interlocutors are those who are closest to you, whether that's friends, relatives, or perhaps even significant others, the importance of maintaining mental flexibility in discourse, getting through to the ideologically possessed, the responsibility that we may share to have discussions with those you disagree with, and how to stay sane during this tumultuous time. This is going to be a lighter episode than normal. Unfortunately, during the time of the recording, I was a little bit strained for time, and so I didn't get to talk to Victor quite as long or as in-depth as I would have liked to, but it was a great starter conversation, and I really wanted to get something out there on maintaining our mental health and the state of polarization in light of this crisis. So without further ado, I give you Victor Rivera. All right, so let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Agora Politics podcast. This is your host, Alex Murshak. Today, we're doing a special episode given the extraneous circumstances that we all find ourselves in with the coronavirus sort of ravaging the entire world right now and everything shut down. And in the spirit of the primary aim of this podcast, which is reducing political polarization in general, one interesting intersection for both of those topics is just maintaining proper psychology, both in times of great crisis as well as in our political discourse and dealing with increasing polarization and trying to better understand one another. So I wanted to have someone on who could speak on this. I've got with me here my friend Victor Rivera. Victor, can you tell people who you are and introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. My name is Victor, and I am currently a clinical psychology student at Pepperdine University. I'm working on my master's and will probably continue on and get some kind of doctorate, maybe in educational psych. And I work as a personal trainer to make money, because we all have to have like 95 jobs these days. So, I would say the thing about me is that my focus is mental and physical health separately, and then together, obviously, those two things go together. And those two things are very useful in this particular time, I would say. And then you know me from online. I am someone who likes to be on social media and mix it up, so to speak. Also learn. I use social media to learn and meet people and, engage in different views, if you will. So that's a little bit about me.
Great. Awesome. And so I actually really like that you're one thing that's interesting about your background is that you're working both with the body and the mind. And this problem of body-mind dualism that we have in Western culture, where we view them as sort of separate and not like completely integrated parts, is one of the biggest issues that we have. And I think it's actually something that contributes to people just being able to maintain their regular health, mental health in general, is just not paying enough attention to their bodies. Right. Yeah. And right now, at least for me, like a lot of the gyms all the gyms are closed.
Yes.
And, I know myself and many others are finding ourselves a little stir crazy just being stuck inside, and, maintaining a regular exercise of some kind, even if you have to do it indoors, is really, really important.
Yes, absolutely. I think for starters, from a psychological standpoint, one thing for people to really think about right away, we're locked up. We're going to be locked up for the foreseeable future, more or less. I can't imagine. I think some people think we'll be out in 2 weeks or whatever, and I don't see that particular range happening, at least a month, 2 months, And then, I would say most people, I think a lot of people would say, kind of plan for the worst, expect the best, or hope for the best, plan for the worst. So right now, I know it's that sense of, hey, there's no rules. I can stay up till, 7 a.m. and binge eat or whatever and all that kind of stuff. It's very tempting to just slide into that lifestyle, but I think I know for me, you find that pretty boring pretty quick, So again, from a psychological standpoint, the best thing you can do right now is assume that this is going to be a while, and hey, you can come up with a routine for yourself, just a daily routine. I'm going to try to get up by this time. I'm going to eat my breakfast. I'm going to work out, read some books. I'm going to use this time to stare at the news, from 12 to 1, something like that.
Maybe don't stare at the news.
Maybe don't stare at the news, right? I have that problem, and we'll get to that probably a little later at some point.
Yeah.
But definitely the gym's closed. We probably can't fathom how much our lives have been upended, and but something like getting to the gym really is difficult for people who like to exercise. There's some specific equipment there. Of course, you can work out at home, but it's not the same. You're home, your couch is there, all that kind of stuff. So it can be very challenging. So that's why I think the more you think about your whole day being kind of a routine, the more likely you'll be to be able to exercise at home.
So, yeah, certainly getting everyone back into maintaining a routine as normal as possible is a really big thing that you can do to keep balance. In terms of how this crisis is being processed, just on a social level and on a national level, or really it's on a global level, that we're all doing this, especially on the internet. But do you think that the political climate has calmed down and everyone has managed to sort of coalesce around sort of a common enemy, or do you still see a lot of kind of petty bickering and infighting and just ridiculous antics in spite of this?
The first thing I'll say is for here in America, I believe President Trump's approval rating is at 50%. It's the highest it's been since, I think, the beginning of his term. So I think people are at least sort of glad there's a leader and coalescing in some sense that, hey, someone is up there doing something, whatever it is, whether you think it's good or bad or not great or whatever. There's someone there, there's people around him, all that kind of stuff. So I see a general move in that direction of simplifying things. Maybe people aren't so worried about everything he says, every tweet. They're more concerned with or agree with whatever his coronavirus takes are. So I think it's at least simplified in terms of what we're seeing. I think, most people are happy to see that a lot of this is, as much as it's a global phenomenon, it's definitely a local one. So people are, if they're not happy with how he's behaving or, policy-wise, they're at least able to turn themselves to the local reality of it. If you're in New York, you're probably not thinking about his latest tweet or something like that. At least I hope not. So I definitely see, as far as the virus goes, that there's less, drama, if you will. There's still petty stuff, though. I know there's a lot of people. There are some people who are worried about him saying the Chinese virus, but don't call it that, and all that stuff. And I feel like that's a smaller amount of people than usual. I felt like we live online pretty much, so it seemed like everyone had an opinion, one way or another, on things like Trump has done, or the right, or something, or the left. Whereas I think it's a smaller portion worried about, say, the name of the virus. It's just kind of like, there's just too many deaths happening too fast.
Yeah.
For people to wage those quote unquote petty battles. So I think a little bit, this kind of conversation is a lot easier to happen now than, say, like when the Covington kids or those stories were going around, where we're all just kind of like agitated at stupid news,
Yeah.
This time, I think, at least makes things more serious. So
Well,
yes and no, I guess, is the fast answer.
One of the interesting dynamics that I saw in the beginning of this, and I'm still seeing it a little bit, is this sort of just predictable behavior of everyone taking whatever their prior belief structure was before this crisis happened, and then interpreting the crisis in such a way to support whatever their primary belief was, right? So if you're a socialist, this is exactly why we need socialism. If you're a libertarian, this is exactly why we need government to get out of the way. If you're a communist, this is exactly why China's system is better, and it just goes on and on and on. And everyone can play this game. And I am seeing some people play that game a little bit. I'm certainly seeing people who are still angry at the slow response, in the initial denial from the Trump administration. And I'm seeing from the other side people saying, well, look, Trump tried to close the borders down in January and people, didn't want him to do that, blah, 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 blah.
True.
So I'm still seeing people sort of fighting over table scraps in a way.
Absolutely.
But I do think there is a general sentiment that people understand that this problem is so much bigger than all of us right now, that if we're getting distracted by focusing on trivial and frankly just trivial stuff and things that we can figure out after this is handled, then we're actually harming each other.
Yeah, I mean, my main hope is that people are able to see that this thing is attacking all systems. If you look at like Italy's system, more socialized, blah blah blah, they're obviously getting hammered. If you look at South Korea, a lot of people are saying, "Wow, look at South Korea's response." But I mean, they're still seeing a high level of percentage of deaths. It's just mitigated. It's, I don't know, whatever. It's kind of like 1.5%. And if you do the math here in America, that's still going to be big numbers. You have China, who was slow out of the gate. I hope people see that, and I am as critical of Trump as they get, but I also feel like it's very hard to know what to do with this kind of thing. It's a very strange situation to be in. It's a virus. It's amorphous. It's the deaths. Even though it was highly contagious, we weren't seeing the deaths right away. So I hope people see that they should drop their priors at least a little bit and not assume one particular type of government would have stopped this. So I think it's more of a containment issue. You can argue about that.
Yeah.
Definitely. But I think there's still people who believe we could have numbers like 0 if only we acted really fast or something like that. And had the right Communist Party in place, and I don't believe that.
The other angle that I'm seeing on this is people are making it a dichotomy between protecting health and protecting the functioning of the economy. And it's not either or; it's both and.
Yes. Absolutely.
And in terms of the coming economic hardship that this is going to ensue, I think that's going to be hard on a lot of people as well. And that certainly isn't any kind of economic hardship, whether it's caused by a pandemic or a crash in the financial system, is always going to generally increase the amount of political problems in a country. So I'm a little bit worried about that. I'm not sure what your take is on the economic impacts. I mean, I know that's not really your area, but
I would always say my area is mental health.
So people dealing with unemployment or lack of structure, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a field that, I actually took a course on it last quarter, but there's a field called industrial and organizational psychology. Basically, it's a huge field, but one, specifically here. It's the psychology of having a job, right? And, human relations and all that good stuff. And if you ask people, would you still work when you're retired? I think the number is over 70%. You can Google that or something. But so what does that mean? I mean, working at least at some level is a very important part of people's lives. Mm-hmm. So I think at least, this goes about sort of any topic. I think the most important thing is we have to have a conversation. We don't have to agree on the answer, right? Like getting back to work by Easter is, I think, kind of horrific in terms of, life and death. But I am not going to give people a hard time if they say, jobs and stuff is very meaningful to people. I mean, I will think of my stepdad, for instance, who he's 76 years old. He has COPD, right? He's high in this susceptible range, and he. If someone said, "Hey, you know what? Lockdown ended. You can go back to work," he's someone who would go back to work, even though he's very much like, "Hey, I'm not going to live my life controlled by this thing," or something like that. So it's not just young people trying to sacrifice old people or whatever. I think there's definitely an element of people who know that work and the economy is very important to them. I think the flip side of that, though, is those people should really think about the total number of citizens that will die if we do things too rapidly without any sort of control over what's going to happen. But, the main thing to me is we have to at least have a conversation. I think the economy and working and society is something that is a part of the equation that you absolutely have to account for. We can't just shut it down for a year and a half. I tip toward humanity and keeping us locked in. But it's definitely, it's very important that we look at just working in society. I want to make sure we avoid people making a run on the convenience stores and crime and things like that. We don't want to get to that particular place.
Yeah.
So let's have a conversation at least.
It does make you acutely aware of the thin layer of social structure that sort of keeps everything running and how fragile that really is. The supply chains and just being able to normally function and getting, like you said, we're at a point where we just don't want this to overwhelm the system so heavily that we end up in a chaotic situation.
Absolutely.
Well, I was just saying, in terms of keeping the peace, though, keeping calm.
Yeah.
What are some things that we can do to have better conversations when we politically disagree? Because you and I know just from our interactions online, we don't agree on everything. We certainly have different viewpoints, and we're not exactly the most always the most polite about it. In terms of telling you what we think. So. We managed to nevertheless still have friendly relations. So what do you think we could do to have better conversations with each other? How important is it to try to talk to people with different views? Do you talk to people with views that you detest? How do you draw the line? What do you do with radicals? I want to get into all those.
Radical. Okay, let's start at the top, which is I was really happy. I forget what the specific issue was. But I was really happy when, we were arguing online. And you said, I bet if we were talking in person, it wouldn't be like this. Even if we weren't agreeing, it wouldn't be, just snarky, nasty, whatever. And so I think that really stuck with me. I'm glad you said that. And I think that's the first thing you want to say in terms of disagreeing with people online, in person. So different. We'll get to that. But so I think the first thing is just you always want to say to yourself before you send the flame, or at least after. Sometimes things happen quickly, but you like you did, right? It's called a repair. So you repair the relationship, friendship, online friendship, whatever you want to call it. So, it's something, right? We got how many hours a day are we on there? It clearly matters on some level, right? People say, "Oh, it's just online." It's like, well, I mean,
there's something magical happening on Twitter. I'm just going to tell people.
There is. I know, right? I mean, it's human interaction, especially for people who, are in academia, introverted a little bit, maybe, just busy, whatever.
There's a lot of extroverts on Twitter. There's Gary V. He's on Twitter.
We like information, so it's important. So I think you don't want to lose that, right? Just because you disagree on one thing. So I think the first thing you do is say, hey, if this was, if this person was sitting across from me, would I be behaving this particular way? And the chances are probably not. And then from there, you say, is this person human? Just they're human, right? Like they're a person. They're not the little avatar that you see.
Okay, so that's the online atmosphere. What do I do, for example, when I'm at the dinner table and I've got people that are close to me and we vehemently disagree with one another? And maybe one of them is even convinced that the other one is so wrong that they might be immoral for being that wrong. How do you deal with those kind of relationships that could potentially rupture over a political disagreement?
I think the first thing is noticing how you're physically feeling. Mm-hmm. If you feel hot, you know what I mean? If your eyebrows kind of furrowed, is that the word? If you're feeling like, almost like when you do online, right? When someone's saying something.
I don't get angry online that much, so I don't know.
Yeah, you know what? I'm pretty good, but I also I just get agitated. I get agitated is the word. I'm not angry. At least 99.99% of the time. But I can get agitated. It's just like I'm not there. I like to be right. I hate being wrong. So I just
you're just mindlessly on Twitter after having a really bad day, and then you're just looking to lash out.
You know what? That's another thing. So if you're saying, I think there's a few things you can do, right? This person, it's a dinner table, it's family, it's a close friend, all the above. The first thing you might say is, what kind of day am I having? Mm-hmm. First of all, because if I'm having a bad day, and then this person's like, this thing is no worse than the flu or something, right? And your brain's like, oh my God, exponential growth and curves, and you have all this information, and you could totally
the corona freak out.
Yeah, you could totally go off on them, but also you're locked in the house, and you're worked up, and maybe someone called you a jerk earlier. I don't know. So at least go through like a system of checkdowns before getting into it, which is what is my goal here? Right? Is my goal to unleash my anger and make my ego feel better, or is my goal to have a conversation, a two-way conversation where I get information from this person? I think it's always good to ask questions. Why do you think it's not as bad as the flu? Why do you think it's not as bad as the flu, right? Something like that. And then from there, you say, well, here's what I've been reading, and a lot of the evidence shows that while the numbers are not as much as the flu now, we're talking things are going to double, triple down the road. This is what I'm seeing. And then kind of leave it at that. I have the 5-minute rule, or whatever you want to call it, which is if you can't say it in under 5 minutes, don't say it, because that's just, most people aren't going to listen to you if you're just teeing off on them at dinner for and it's probably less than that, but I think you can get your point. I'm a big believer in planting seeds. A lot of people think I have to change this person's mind in real time, and that's where a lot of the frustration arises. So I'm more of a planting seeds kind of person, typically. Except when I'm online, I get really worked up. But, I had a friend find me on Facebook, and I hadn't seen him since, say, high school, pretty sure. And he messaged me, hey, man, hope everything's good. What's really crazy, it annoyed me at the time, but the things you said in high school really make sense now. I was always kind of a debater type person. That's, what? Because of that, you should be thinking like that. So even though this person's in front of you right now at the dinner table, just think, what? Maybe they're not listening to me in this moment, but the next time they read a story, there's a little bit of doubt in what they're reading, right? Whatever the material is, or they question it. And they're like, yeah, you know what? I guess you were right. I don't know. But when you add all those layers of emotion onto it, just people go the other way, right? Unfortunately, that's the way the human mind works. So when you are sort of making it a moral thing, even though their facts are wrong, you're kind of like, what are you, an idiot? What's wrong with you? Do you even care about people? I don't know. You might say some stuff like that. Not you, but some people might start getting into that type of thing. So when they're across from you, just try to remember to ask and try to learn from them and then share what you got, kind of move on to the next thing.
Yeah, and there's also the possibility that you could be wrong about something.
That's a big thing. I'm really glad you said that because you might be wrong. I mean, that's what's you should doubt yourself a little bit, and I think that's part of the problem where people just can't admit that. Like, just if this person in front of you is not admitting that they might be wrong, chances are you're doing the same thing. So you should at least have a little bit of healthy skepticism in terms of what you think is going on.
Yeah, there's also one of the other issues, I think, is that people will identify with their belief systems, right?
Yeah.
So obviously we all get defensive when our beliefs are challenged because if they're making us doubt our beliefs, then they're creating more uncertainty about the world, and that's anxiety provoking. But we can always get to a point where our beliefs are going to change. I mean, I've experienced multiple changes in my belief systems, politically, religiously, spiritually, in all kinds of ways. And I haven't even been, alive very long, or really picked up too many. And one of the things that's interesting about this podcast is that we are explicitly non-ideological, and so we're committed to a method. And insofar as our method of sense making or our method of inquiry is what we follow, then that could be said to be our belief system. But we're not trapped in a particular ideology. And the reason for that is that, just for me personally, once you label yourself, oh, I'm a this, I'm a that, I belong in this camp or camp XYZ, well, now you have an anchor that your entire belief structure can reinforce around, and it makes you less flexible, and it gives you more blind spots. And now you're committed to a thing that isn't you, right? Like whatever that thing is, whether it's, the Democratic Party or, defeating Trump in the next election or like whatever, or, libertarianism, whatever your political objective is something separate than you are, right? It's some kind of meme or organization. It's not you.
Yes. Absolutely.
So what do you think about people that are ideologues or trapped in an extreme political persuasion? I mean, we don't consider that a category of mental illness, but so you're allowed you're allowed to be a perfectly sane person and have politically extreme views. But it certainly can make you difficult to talk to. On the other hand, I know people who are really far on the left or really far on the right who are actually perfectly capable of having a cordial conversation with someone. So do you think it's more the belief structure that someone has, or do you think it's their particular temperament that makes them more or less difficult to have a productive dialogue with?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes to my mind is this is just kind of guessing. I think it's more the case of a temperament thing. Mm-hmm. For instance, for me, I mean, if I'm looking at it from a clinical psychology standpoint, when you're doing therapy and you're investigating mental illness and treatments and all that, and working with people, you want to have a theoretical orientation at least a little bit, because when someone shows up across from you and they just, oh my God, my day and my husband and my kids and my job and all that kind of stuff, it can be really overwhelming. When a lot of information comes flying at you. So you want to have an underlying theoretical orientation so that when you're processing this information, you're able to do so in a way that you can collect all of it and kind of, boil it down to a little bit of a chunk and work with this person, and then have the flexibility to use other orientations based on their particular problem. Like some orientations are better for just anxiety symptoms, for instance. But if they're having existential dread, and I think like you were talking about the mind and the body, maybe you'll bring up a Gestalt type method where it's like, hey, why aren't you thinking of yourself all as one, whatever. So I think that's the same thing politically. It's one thing to be a little bit of an ideologue or just kind of label yourself a certain thing. But if you do so in a way that's more of a general orientation politically, right? Hey, look, I really think a society would be better if we focused on individual rights, or if we, had socialism or something like that. But if you allow, I like that word you used earlier, which is flexibility. People who are temperamentally flexible, you can have a conversation with, right? But the people who are just really rigid,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they could call themselves a centrist and still be really rigid, It's
Right.
Like they're not able to appreciate why someone would be so far left or something like that, You might have someone like Chomsky, as far left as he is, he really likes engaging in, free conversation and debate and, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean you're one thing or the other when you're an ideologue in terms of conversation. Some people are they're at least willing to show up. So that, that has to do with challenging your temperament and saying, hey, at least pretend to be flexible. That's my hypothesis anyway.
So there's trait openness, right? And there's certain degrees of flexibility in terms of novelty and wanting to explore different belief systems. And then there's psychological defensiveness.
Yes.
And those are actually separate things. So someone who's not necessarily high in openness could still be relatively easy to talk to, even if they're low openness, just because if they're very calm and not in a defensive state. So I guess one of the questions I have for you is how do you get people to be less defensive in these conversations so that they're more inclined to consider your point of view? Or really is it more about understanding? I'm sorry. Is it more about understanding them?
I mean, so I think, well, first of all, this is why I really love clinical psychology, because it makes you do these things in real time. You are going to have a skinhead sitting across from you or something like that. You know what I mean? You're going to have, if you're in a prison, you're working with, maybe a murderer, something like that, or you're just working with people and maybe they're a communist and you're not, and whatever the case is. And I think, you at least, no one says you have to work with everybody, but when someone's across from you, the first thing you do is you accept their humanity. And I think when you accept their humanity and when you show them that they're heard, agree or disagree, but when they're heard, you'll see, ideally, less of those defense mechanisms. One major thing I think people should always try to do, even if you're worked up, is model good behavior, right? So you have to kind of say, what if I was on the other side? How would I want someone to behave? Or if my child were watching me, and this person, said some crazy view, whatever the case is, then I said, well, I don't agree with that, but I know that we both agree on freedom of speech, or So the more you accept their humanity and try to find things that you agree on, the more you can bring those walls down. Kind of create some space between the particular thing that you disagree on, and just try to imagine that there's probably a lot, the things that you disagree on, and try to imagine there's a lot that you do agree on. So that's the first couple of things you could do in a situation like that, to try to bring down those, defense mechanisms and cognitive biases, where they're identifying with their belief more than just seeing it as just an idea. And then from there, I think the more you ask people questions and try to learn about them, the more you can then try to see where there's space for discussion, disagreement. Because a lot of people are just not ready for that, right? They're not. They haven't been challenged in their whole life. You know, a lot of people just walk around and say stuff. I'm sure you've noticed that. And, you know, we look online, we're like, what the hell? Look at this. No, it's 2%, not 3%. You know, we're pedantic about every little, you know, study or something like that. And not a lot of people are ready for that. So you just kind of have to see where people are at and work with them and understand their humanity. And I think you'll be able to bring those walls down. And your own, right? I think it's a way of settling yourself so that you're open to discussion.
Yeah, I think training yourself to become desensitized to outrage, and not just online, but also just generally getting, you know, triggered in real life by trivial events. I'm not talking about genuine trauma. Is something that is just part of, I guess, mental hygiene, really. I view it like meditating or getting regular exercise or anything else. Like, I have a responsibility to curate my, especially my digital media diet, but also my social life, so that I'm not doing things that are just feeding these negative emotions, right?
Yeah. I haven't read it in a while, but I really love I forget his name, Mark, I forget his last name. He wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Oh, okay.
And I love, there's a lot of good ideas in there. They tend to be stoic ideas. But I really love the general idea that you only have so many fucks to give, as he puts it, eloquently. So that's a great way to address your day, which is like, hey, you know, here's how much I should be consuming. And if I consume more than this, then, you know, my workouts stink. My relationships with the family, people in my life stink. You know, right? If you're angry online for 12 hours a day, then, you know, chances are you're not spending enough time with your family, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I like what you said there, which is thinking about what you're trying to feed, which is you want to at least, well, they call it the PNP sandwich when you're talking to people. You know, give them some positive feedback, a little bit of negative, and then positive. So just think about that for yourself, which is, you know, how much positive am I putting into my day? There's always going to be crap, you know, feeding the bad news, you know, stuff like that. But you also want to feed yourself good stuff, exercise, eating well, getting enough sleep, so that you can deal with, you know, the tougher stuff in life. And also just so you can be a whole self. Not just angry self.
Yeah, and one of the things that I try to keep in mind, just from my own experience, is that when you're seeing people that are really angry and they're lashing out, whether that's online or in real life, what you're actually seeing is like a really hurt person.
Yeah.
Like that person is hurt right now, and
absolutely.
And that's why they're reacting in that way. And so when you take that perspective, it's a lot easier for you to not respond, for you to not take on that frame, but also to empathize with them. At least for me, I remember, you know, periods earlier in my life when I was more angry or more, I guess, disgruntled generally in terms of my interactions. And that's just because I was in a bad place, you know, and people, you know, fall down from time to time, and it takes them some time to get back up. And so with all of that in mind, we're trying to move past ideology. We're trying to incorporate new ways of thinking about solving problems. On this show, we're dedicated to one-on-one dialogue. Do you think you have a responsibility to reach out to people that disagree with you, or do you think it's perfectly fine to sort of stay in your lane and avoid confrontational conversations? What's your take on that?
Yeah.
That might just be a temperamental thing based on how combative you are, but
you know what? One thing you should always try to do is be true to yourself. So if there's something that's really important to you, and someone you disagree with is saying something, doing something, and you'd like to say something back, I would say try to have a discussion, or at least make your point and move on. We talked about the ways you can do that, but definitely, I'm not confrontation is a very strong word. So if you can minimize that, it's hard to be confrontational. I'd say the first thing is don't feel like you have to be perfect at it. It's like I said earlier, which is it's about planting seeds. So even if you're kind of like, why would you say that or something, and you run off, I don't know. If you feel like it's important to you to kind of say something, that's good. There's a lot of people temperamentally who just say, I just want to go about my day, and I don't want to, have all these debates. I don't want to talk about politics at the dinner table. I would encourage those people to at least say that they don't want to talk about politics, so that they're having some kind of a discussion, so that you at least you're just knowing something about them, because who knows, maybe you'll change your mind. I don't know. So I think it's definitely important to reach out and talk to people that you disagree with. I like learning. I mean, if you are any way interested in learning about yourself and just learning new information, that's one reason to talk to people you disagree with, because you're getting a new viewpoint, and you're getting new information, which is tough at first, but always exciting down the road. And then the other thing is learning how to communicate. We're humans. We are both, all we do is communicate, and all we do is suck at it. So the more you're willing to go, suck is maybe a strong word, but when it comes to like, hey, communicating emotions and disagreements and what you want, and
we're still evolving apes.
Yeah, I mean it's changed so much. I mean, look at this. This is way different than anything we've ever done historically, right? We're talking over the computer and sort of listening to cues come through the headphones, stuff like that. So we're constantly evolving, and then so you have to try to evolve with that, right? We've gone way beyond, rationing bananas or something like that. We're
rationing toilet paper.
So really, we haven't gone that far if you think about it. It all comes down to wiping your butt. But that's actually literally true, right? What do we do in these crazy scenarios? And clearly, you do have to have a discussion with people who disagree with you. Something like, hey, you shouldn't buy all that toilet paper. Other people need it. So it's really unavoidable, I think, to never have those kind of difficult conversations. So you should actively sort of pursue them, so that when it's really, really important, like now, you're more comfortable with it.
Yeah, and right now is an interesting time because we're actually almost more removed from our natural environment than I think we've ever been. And that we're all stuck on quarantine. We can't have normal social interactions. We can't gather. We can't. Many of us can't eat together, depending on how many people you live with. I'm lucky that I live in a house with some other people, so it's not just me here. But a lot of us are really isolated, and even we're making do communicating online like we are right now. And all my classes are online. All my work is online right now. But it's certainly nothing like normal social interaction. This is like people are calling it like wartime. I view it more like Ice Age time. I'm imagining all of us sort of just staying in our caves all winter and waiting the storm out.
Yeah. I mean, we I don't want to say nice, but what's nice is we do have a corollary, which is the so-called Spanish flu, and I mean, it was right after war, kind of during war, right? World War One, where you had a clear enemy, especially in those days of the trenches, and then you sort of have this weird, invisible thing now. So it's like, can I even go outside? What's going to happen in my community? The upside and downside for us is we see this for real as a global problem. So it's really, we can feel extra isolated because we can't even go anywhere in the world pretty much travel-wise. So it is a very strange time. It's similar to the past, but also very unique because we're all this planet, at least aware of what's happening and finding ways to walk ourselves down and have to communicate. So, yeah, it is kind of I used to say age of sorts, where we're super limited and hiding out in our igloos.
Anything else you want to say to people before we go for just staying on the level during these strange times?
100%. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate that. I think if us talking and doing this is one way people can keep themselves leveled. I've been doing video chats with lots of people who I normally just kind of DM or whatever, but try to see as many faces as you can. Don't just text them. Call people, hear their voices, do the FaceTime. We have the technology. Do group chats with your friends. Try to make it as fun as you possibly can. Keep be honest with where you're at. If you're alone, if you're single, whatever the case is, reach out to people even more so. Very tough. I can't imagine. I'm lucky I'm married, I have a kid and all that, so I can always just by the hour I can say, wow, I'm freaking out. If I was alone, I don't even know what I'd be doing. So reach out to people and just tell them what's going on, and always be okay. Feel like you can reach out. And then, like we said earlier, as difficult as it is, try to maintain some routine. And if anything, one thing to me, what do people always say? Oh, if I only have the time. You can also look at this time as, hey, now you have the time, right? Oh, now you can learn Spanish, or now you can, read that book you've always been wanting to read. It's a little difficult with the stress levels, but still think about those things that you would have done in the past had you had the time, and try to commit to one small thing a day and work on it.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Victor. I'm so glad you took the time to come talk to us today. We really appreciate it. We'd love to have you on again sometime.
That would be amazing.
Maybe after all this is done, maybe we could do a review.
2025. Yeah, definitely. That would be great.
Victor is a clinical psych student at Pepperdine, and you could follow Victor on Twitter at CognitiveVicta. Victor, thank you so much, and I'll see you later.
Thank you. All right. Take it easy.